Hi everyone. I'm actually touching up a little bit to get into another podcast episode, so bear with me. I'm going to be doing my makeup while giving my thoughts about this episode, and that's episode 12. It is about challenging the status quo behind mental health and creating that safe space where we can all come together and have open and honest conversations about our mental health and about how we're feeling. We had Dr. Mavis Fortingo come on, and she had a lot of good things to say, which I really want to tell you guys to go out there and listen to the podcast. The link will be in our bio. There are a few things that stuck out to me. Number one, which we had the conversation about before, but it didn't even occur to me that those two things could really be directed to one another. And as some of you may know, there's been like a rampant series of drug abuse stories, especially in the African community. And a lot of people are still like being so judgmental, especially when someone dies or loses their life from like drug abuse. It's a very judgmental environment that still prevails, and this is definitely something that we want to stop and have an open conversation about it. Basically, the relation that she gave between mental health and drug abuse is a lot of us, we tend to bottle a lot of things and not like have open, honest conversations about them. And as a result of that, it affects our mental health, especially the struggles that we're going through, and especially our African men who have been raised in a male-dominated, male-chauvinistic society, where as a man, you have to be the provider. As a man, you have certain roles, you have to hold your emotions in and stuff like that. Growing up in that kind of environment can affect your ability to be vulnerable because they look at vulnerability as weakness. And I'm very glad that a lot of African men are actually coming together and standing up and creating that safe space where they can actually communicate and talk about their problems freely. Now, the fact that a lot of them actually bottle all of these emotions in, and not only men, a lot of us, I would just say a lot of us, the fact that we bottle all of these emotions in, it now leads to mental breakdown or looking for coping mechanisms that we need to soothe the pain, the mental pain that we're going through. And of course, what does that lead to? We start looking for answers from either drug abuse or sex addiction, especially with the case of drug abuse, even though not minimizing the impact that sex addiction has on our community, because, or at least on someone's life, because it really affects quality of life for sure. But focusing on drug abuse, that's something that it now eventually becomes an illness, which a lot of us in our community, we're still oblivious to the fact that drug abuse is actually an illness. Most people who abuse drugs actually do not want to continue abusing drugs because of they know the impact that drug abuse has on them and on their quality of life. It takes a tremendous amount of willpower and discipline to overcome all of that. And so when you don't feel safe expressing yourself as an African, for example, you tend to go to drugs, for example, to soothe that pain. And what happens? You become an addict. So now you're fighting two battles. You're fighting drug abuse and you're fighting your mental health. And that could either lead to death or it could lead to a long-term struggle of these things. And the reason why you're struggling with those things is because you don't really have an outlet to express yourself. And I feel like that was basically the premise of our conversation on this episode, to really encourage one another to come together, create those safe spaces for our people to be able to express themselves very freely without any judgment. And I felt like it was such a very good conversation to have. The story that really, really impacted me, even on a personal level, because I could not even imagine myself being there, was, or at least experiencing that kind of situation from a healthcare professional perspective, was Danielle's patient who was literally in the middle of being suicidal, Thank goodness, thank God, the fact that she had to reach out to this patient continuously, that's actually what saved the patient's life. So just hearing that story, it kind of shook me, just because what if she did not listen to her instincts to reach out, to call that patient? She probably would have died. And again, another thing that I really want to reiterate is that mental health and even suicidal ideation is not selfishness. You have people who have families, you have people who have a whole life ahead of them, but they end up taking their own life. And it's not because they didn't care, it's not because they're selfish, only thinking about themselves. At that moment, you're not even in your sound mind to make any decisions. Like, if you were in your normal mind and you look at the mindset that you're in that case, you probably will not trust yourself in that scenario to make the best decision. And usually this decision of suicide, it suddenly happens most of the time when the people are by themselves. So it's like they're by themselves and there's nobody else to trust them with the decision that they're making, and then they go ahead and they make the decision to take their lives. So it's not because they were selfish or they were in their right minds, because I can basically trust that if they somehow came back to life, they probably would not have made the same decision to take their life at that moment. So I just want us to be more sensitive. You can see people being the happiest people ever, but all of us, we have our battles that we're fighting. So I just want us to be very, very, very sensitive about these topics, to keep our judgment aside and just open our minds, open our perspective, listen. The key word is listening. I feel like a lot of things would have been avoided in our community for however many years now, if we just listened to one another. So that's basically what I wanted to say about this. It was such a very great episode, and I really want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening in, because honestly, without you guys, I don't know where this podcast would have been. It's because of my listeners that we have been able to keep up with the stories, recommendations that people have sent over to me. So I really, really appreciate that. So I just want to thank everyone for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode, like I always say. Bye.